Our nation is in the midst of an epidemic unlike any we've ever seen before. The use of opioids, pills initially prescribed as painkillers, has exploded into a crisis affecting our entire community. The easy availability of opioids has unleashed unforeseen consequences across our country, especially right here in Northeast Florida, causing pain, desperation, and in some cases, if not treated, death for those finding themselves addicted to these powerful substances. Good evening. I'm Dr. Jeremy Mirabile, Medical Director of Recovery Keys, an addiction treatment program located here in Jacksonville, Florida. As a local physician specializing in addiction, I work on the front lines helping those struggling with opioids and other types of addiction put their lives and their families back together again. Tonight, I am proud Recovery Keys and the staff here at News 4 Jax have teamed together to bring attention to this complex subject, commercial-free, over the next hour. If you or someone you love are struggling with opioids or other substances, I want you to know it always starts with a phone call for help. Tonight, the staff at Recovery Keys is available to take your calls, answer questions, and provide hope for how you or someone you love can begin the process of recovery. Call our hotline at the number on your screen to speak with an addiction specialist who will listen and guide your next steps for getting the help you need.
America is in crisis. The country hooked on drugs, but not the kind you buy in a dark alley. You can find them at the corner pharmacy. On the average day in the United States, nearly 100 people die from an opioid-related overdose. Powerful painkillers prescribed by doctors. Now, the president says it's a national emergency.
It is a problem the likes of which we have not seen.
Tonight, News 4 Jax dives into the cause of the epidemic, how it started.
There's no question that our best, strongest pain medicines are the opioids.
The people affected.
I had absolutely no inhibitions. I wasn't scared of anything. I wasn't scared to die.
I took it, fell in love with it, wanted more of it.
The first responders on the front lines.
It's killing people left and right.
Just in one shift, we responded to the same patient who overdosed 3 times in a matter of an hour and a half.
And how to stop it. From Channel 4, the local station, this is Opioid Nation, an American epidemic. Presented without commercials by Recovery Keys. Physician-led addiction treatment closer to home.
Over the next hour, we're going to take an in-depth look at the deadliest overdose crisis in U.S. history.
It's prompted Governor Scott to declare a statewide public health emergency, allowing Florida to tap into millions in federal funds to fight this epidemic. These are just some of the faces of local men and women who died from opioid overdoses just this year. They were wives, husbands, mothers, fathers, brothers and sisters, daughters and sons, people from all walks of life.
The number of deaths are growing by the year. This map of Northeast Florida shows how many people lost their lives to opioids. In the first half of 2015, Duval County had the most deaths by far with 55.
Now compare that to the first half of 2016 with 155 overdose deaths in Duval County, an increase of close to 180%.
And now to Southeast Georgia. These numbers are for all of 2015 compared to 2016, a 5% increase from year to year. When it comes to the United States as a whole, in 2016 alone, drug overdoses likely killed an estimated 59,000 to 65,000 Americans. That's more Americans in 1 year than the entire Vietnam War. In 2015, drug overdoses topped annual deaths from car crashes, gun violence, and even HIV/AIDS during that epidemic's peak in 1995. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie heads the president's commission on combating the opioid crisis.
142 Americans are dying every day of drug overdose, every day, which means we have a 9/11 scale loss every 3 weeks.
This issue is so important to our News 4 Jax parent company, Graham Media, that all of our stations have collaborated to bring you this 1-hour special.
We have crews covering the epidemic all over the United States. Channel 4's Scott Johnson introduces us to 4 local survivors in a story that we're calling the faces of opioids.
There's a common thread.
I took it, Fell in love with it, wanted more of it.
Among people I found,
I had absolutely no inhibitions. I wasn't scared of anything. I wasn't scared to die.
who abused opioids.
I mean, I probably would have sold my mama to get more dope if I could have.
That with so many highs,
I fell in love.
with the drug.
With the drug.
There's always a bottom.
I thought I was gonna die behind a dumpster with a needle in my arm.
But one thing that's not common among these four
It doesn't discriminate.
is where they were
It was just a cycle, never-ending cycle that was never going to end.
before opioid addiction entered their lives.
I see it all ages, all races, all poverty levels. It doesn't care.
First, there was the real estate worker making $100,000 a year, and a girl growing up in Los Angeles with Tourette's syndrome, and the young man growing up around local country clubs, and the small-town boy voted most likely to succeed. But success did not come to any of them. The only thing that did, homelessness and death.
Yeah, the first time I ever used heroin, I was 14. I was trying to look for an escape.
Our first story began out west.
I'm from Los Angeles area, California. I grew up with a normalish childhood. I have Tourette's. So.
Sarah Mackelberg started abusing after finding the drugs helped her with her Tourette's.
My mom used to cry herself to sleep at night because she knew I was sleeping in a tent behind a grocery store.
Jail soon followed, around the time her parents moved to Jacksonville.
I stole from them. I lied to them. I stole from their parents. I was the epitome of everything you don't want your child to be.
But they still loved her and moved her here after she got out.
They just were like, you need to get help. They were trying to save me from going back to being incarcerated.
But that's when things went from bad to worse.
I tried to stab my family.
You tried to stab your family?
I did. I was getting blackout intoxicated at night, and I tried to stab my whole family with a butcher knife. And then when that did not work, I tried to slit my own throat, and I had no idea I was trying to do this until it was shown to me.
Our next story begins in a Jacksonville country club.
Junior and senior year, I started partying a lot, just to be social, to be the popular guy in school.
Where Palmer Kelly grew up in upper-class suburbia.
I used Xanax for about 4 years daily, and I would always be drinking on it.
He turned down golf scholarships to college.
I felt like I was starting to fail everybody, including myself. I always thought that I could do better. I was extremely hard on myself.
The Xanax quickly turned to harder drugs.
Recently, it became a heroin addiction.
How recently?
3 months ago.
And within years, the land of golf courses were left behind for homelessness and a halfway house in Springfield.
It completely flipped my world upside down. Spent some time in jail.
But that was not even bottom. His hit this year on May 11th.
I got in my car and drove off, totaled my car, I crashed into a guardrail, and I hit 2 other people. And I was dead when the fire rescue came.
He was clinically dead for minutes. A medic used Narcan to bring him back.
When I woke back up, I saw a white light. It was like a slot machine, my eyes were rolling. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. I couldn't talk.
Next, there's Autumn Layton Allen.
Well, about 11 years ago, I had a daughter that passed away, and doctors started prescribing me over-the-counter prescription medications, and after time, I started abusing them.
Along the way, this successful mortgage broker started blowing thousands a month on meds. Do you realize there's a difference at this point?
Not really, and I think because of my pain, people didn't want to bring that up to me. My family, friends didn't want to bring that to my attention.
By the end, most of her drugs came from the streets.
My addiction went into full-blown, I was just gone at that point.
Over the years, Autumn's husband, Robert Woodworth, became addicted as well.
I ended up having to break the door in.
And finally, her bottom arrived last September when he overdosed.
I found him and tried to revive him because I thought it had just happened. Called for rescue. But he must have had some kind of look about him that they knew because they didn't pull out equipment when they came in. They came rushing in.
They immediately knew what it was.
And they looked at me and told me they were sorry.
Our final story started in small-town Georgia.
Real big into sports, and it was kind of cool to do the whole drug thing, you know, at little parties, stuff like that.
Colby Jones was voted most likely to succeed.
I was dabbling in opiates, Percocet, stuff like that when I was in high school. It became more of heroin, an opiate called Opana.
Sadly, a few years after high school,
Lived in hotels when I could, cars, road.
he was homeless on the streets of Brunswick.
Just lived like 3 or 4 years like that, sick every day. Miserable, you know, you have to wake up with it. If not, then you can't function during the day at all.
Jones finally wound up in rehab at Recovery Coast in Jacks Beach,
I'm so grateful for this place.
where he met Palmer.
Look at us now, man. We're growing.
They have since become close, and we met them on graduation day.
What are your plans for the future?
My plans for the future is just to be the best man I can be.
Up the street, Sarah now works at Beach's Recovery.
Our minimum stay is 45 days, but
She's been sober for years.
I'm a whole different person, like night and day. I am happy and I smile most of the time.
And finally for Autumn,
And I wanted to be completely free of narcotics.
sobriety set in around 3 months ago
And I didn't think it was possible.
when she checked into Gateway Community Services downtown. Do you think a place like this saved your life?
It absolutely saved my life.
They all want others to learn something from what they went through. From the addiction perspective, are you ready to go?
I am ready, yes, sir. After everything I've been through, you know, it's just a whole new ball game now.
There's not only addiction out there,
You know, I just want to let people know that they're not alone out there because I've definitely been there.
there's also hope.
So who is most affected by this epidemic? According to the CDC, among those who died from prescription opioid overdoses between 1999 and 2014, rates were highest among people between the ages of 25 and 54.
They were also higher among non-Hispanic whites compared to blacks and Hispanics. Men were more likely to die from overdoses. But the gap between men and women is closing. Women are more likely to have chronic pain and be prescribed prescription painkillers than men. And they're also the fastest growing group to become addicted.
Now a powerful and heartbreaking video that shows an overdose firsthand. You can see a 2-year-old child screaming in despair after a mother collapsed in a store aisle in Massachusetts.
The video was taken last September. First responders were able to revive the woman with 2 doses of Narcan. Officials condemned the person, though, who shot the video for not helping the child.
So how do you recognize the signs if someone you love is experiencing an overdose? Let's start with the most dangerous sign, and that's breathing problems, including slowed or irregular breathing.
Other symptoms include mood swings, nausea or vomiting, pinpoint pupils, extreme sleepiness, or the inability to wake up, as well as bluish skin around the lips and fingernails. If you notice any combination of these symptoms, call 911 immediately. Vic Michelucci takes us to the front lines of this crisis here in Jacksonville.
Every single day, several times a day, local rescuers are called to overdoses.
Rescue intersection knowledge available.
It's killing people left and right.
Opioids are not just a problem here, they're fueling an epidemic.
Just in one shift, we responded to the same patient who overdosed 3 times in a matter of an hour and a half.
I've pronounced 3 people dead in one 24-hour shift from heroin, needles in their hand.
News4Jax was granted unprecedented access to ride along with Jacksonville fire and rescue crews for 2 days. We watched as they responded to dozens of 911 calls. From fires to medical problems to car crashes, they keep very busy around the clock. They responded to 135,000 total emergencies last year. That's more than ever before.
Rescue 19 acknowledged.
A big factor, a record number of drug overdoses, sometimes more than 300 in a single month.
How busy are rescuers right now with drug-related calls?
It's unbelievable, crazy busy.
Lieutenant Eric Proswimmer has worked with JFRD for 17 years, and he's never seen it this bad.
You're saying without a doubt, things are getting worse.
Absolutely. It's an epidemic across the entire country.
In Arlington, a man on the verge of cardiac arrest. Rescuers got here quickly, rushed him to the hospital, and saved his life. We found out from police it's not the first OD at this address. First responders call these people frequent flyers, addicts who overdose, get revived, and then do it again and again.
What's the emotional toll on you?
It's sad. It's really sad. When there's kids involved, it's sad. It's hard. You know, I've had to call in DCF because we've had 3 adults in one room passed out with little kids sitting there watching TV, playing on their video games. But that was normal for them.
Later that same day on the west side, Lieutenant Aaron Biebernitz and his team are called to a suspected overdose in the middle of our interview. Minutes later, they arrive and take a woman to the ER. She survives. The next day, crews on the south side also keeping busy. Inside this pharmacy, a young woman has OD'd. She says she wants to go to rehab.
It is an uphill battle. It's a battle that we just can't seem to win. Maybe you could classify it as we win the battle, but we are, in a sense, losing the war. We are able to save people, and that's ultimately our goal, is to save lives. It's up to the individual, though, to, after we save them, to get that help and get that treatment.
JFRD crews use a drug called Narcan to stop an overdose.
Sometimes you can use it up to as many times as 8 to 9 to even 10 times a shift.
It works well, but comes with a price that's straining the fire department's budget. Last year, taxpayers spent $77,000 on Narcan. This year, that number is expected to double to $155,000. That's more than a quarter of JFRD's total budget for medicine. And the cost doesn't end there. Last year, the bill to transport thousands of overdose patients was more than $3 million. 63% of the people transported are uninsured, so the city likely won't get any money back.
The number of responses that the officers are going to throughout the city, it's continuing to increase.
Police are feeling the same toll. Ron Lenvey and Mike Bruno are directors at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office.
A unit like our homicide unit, who investigates all deaths, whether, criminal, natural, until we determine exactly what it is. They're investigating all those. They feel the crunch. They're having to go sometimes, multiple times a day to different overdose cases.
The narcotics unit now has specific detectives whose goal is to get heroin and fentanyl off the streets and catch the dealers. But it's a vicious cycle and a problem officers are far from fixing.
Are you frustrated?
Certainly frustrated that this is senseless. That you have someone in the drug trade that is preying on these individuals, putting these opiate derivatives and synthetic drugs and cutting these, the drugs, or creating these drugs that ultimately are killing individuals for profit.
No matter how bad our resources are taxed, we're still able and we're still willing to do everything we can to make it to everybody's call for help.
Police and firefighters know there's no easy answer to stop this epidemic, but they hope to slow it down and save as many lives as possible.
We spoke with members of other local agencies who say they're seeing the same problems.
To read their responses to our questions and how they are fighting the epidemic, go to news4jax.com/addiction.
So what are these highly addictive drugs that can destroy lives? Well, opioids include heroin, which is illegal, and also prescription painkillers such as morphine, methadone, hydrocodone, oxycodone, and fentanyl. These drugs can be sold under the brand names OxyContin, Percocet, Vicodin, Percodan, and more.
Here are drugs that are not opioids: cocaine, methamphetamines, ecstasy, LSD, ketamine, other club drugs, or steroids. Now to another drug Vic touched upon, naloxone, or Narcan, which is the brand name for the drug. It can reverse the effects of an opioid overdose when given right away, either through a muscle injection or through a nasal spray. In 41 states, including Florida and Georgia, you can just walk up to a pharmacist and get Narcan without a prescription. Every 45 minutes, a child in the United States is poisoned by opioids. That's according to a study published in the journal Pediatrics this year. In June, a 10-year-old boy from Miami apparently died of a fentanyl overdose. That makes him one of Florida's youngest victims of the opioid crisis. But how he came in contact with that powerful drug is still a mystery. The epidemic is also forcing thousands of kids into foster care because their addicted parents can no longer care for them. And one local resource takes great pride in the work they do one day at a time, keeping families together through this crisis.
Gateway Community Services is a nonprofit that offers addiction treatment and rehabilitation through a 12-step program. I met one young mother who told me how that program is critical to her recovery after the pull of opioids nearly took her life.
I wanted to try it. And from the first time I tried it, I was hooked.
A young woman addicted to the needle. She spent 17 years of her young life shooting up and prostituting. Her drug of choice, opioids, anything she could find to inject.
I was not even scared when people started dying with this epidemic. I wasn't scared for a while. I don't even know how that could ever have started because I don't come from family like that at all.
Jennifer is sober now and has been for more than a year, living here at Gateway Community Services.
What'd you have for lunch?
Cleaned up.
But she didn't get cleaned up just for herself.
Early.
Who's that?
CJ.
She did it for her 2-year-old.
She was born addicted to cocaine. I was an intravenous user through my whole pregnancy.
Up to the very end when you
Up until the very end.
Wow. This young mother passed on her addiction to her little Kylie.
Just couldn't stop.
At the start, her mother took on the care of her addicted grandchild.
From what she tells me, she had the shakes for a few weeks, but it got better for her. She has no problems now. Yeah, she's smart as can be, determined. Never knew there was ever anything wrong.
Did the doctors say whether there will be any long-term effects?
The main thing is I always have to watch out if Kylie ever decides that she wants to experiment, because she is highly likely to be addicted from the first time she ever does anything. It is going to be challenging, but I'm hoping my experience and sharing that with her as she gets older, that she won't ever want to go in that direction. I love being a mother.
13 years ago, Jennifer first became a mother. Her 13-year-old son now lives with her mom, who adopted him.
My drugs were too important, more important than him.
But things are different now that she's sober.
He's in a good place, very good place.
And so is she. She came here to Gateway a year ago last March when she was in a bad place. Her daughter was taken from her because of her addiction.
I got highly depressed, and I was either going to let the drugs kill me or I needed to get help. So I came in, and as soon as I got here, I found out I was pregnant with my son, so I knew it was even more of a reason to stay.
But now she's proud to say her son CJ was born clean, a healthy baby boy with no drugs in his system, and within weeks she was reunified with her daughter.
I have both my children, and I'm so happy.
And it's working here.
It is working. It is definitely working.
I see the baby.
Jennifer's been clean a year and 5 months by working the 12-step program, attending meetings that are held here on the Gateway campus, and spending time developing bonds with her residents and the treatment experts who work here.
See the bumblebee?
But she says it's the kid factor that's been a huge part of her success.
It's a blessing, because there aren't other places that let you do this, that allow you to bring your children.
We'll take their children in once we feel that they're ready.
Joanne Porter Telfair says Gateway's ability to include their clients' children is key to achieving sobriety and keeping families together.
Once their children hear the moms and the dads, they feel a lot better with the children here with them.
It's not a distraction to their own treatment?
No, no. It's really like a comforter for them to have their children here.
And she says they've been flooded with new clients due to the opioid epidemic.
We're now getting ready to open at least 40 more rooms here for transitional housing.
The need
Yes,
is
the
there.
need is there.
Did you see the tooth? Have you seen?
Oh, yeah, down at the bottom.
Like many moms here, Jennifer's children spend about 6 hours a day at the on-campus daycare, then are able to be with mom the rest of the time, bunked in a room with another mom and kid.
It's actually good because of building a bond. It's another mother. You need that love. You need that support. You know, we're going to love you till you love yourself.
Many areas ravaged by addiction are now filing lawsuits against physicians, pharmacists, and drug wholesalers.
These lawsuits claim that doctors, drug companies, and pill mills exploited patients, got them hooked on drugs, and cost millions of dollars in medical, law enforcement, and other expenses. In the early 90s, the number of painkiller prescriptions filled at U.S. pharmacies increased by 2 to 3 million every year. Around 1996, they jumped by 8 million. Melanie Lawson takes a look at how doctors quickly became part of a painkiller prescription writing bonanza.
The makers of OxyContin launched a marketing campaign. There was a video promotion called I Got My Life Back, where a doctor enthusiastically endorsed the drug. It profiled 6 patients whose pain was stopped because of this powerful pill. The marketing caught the attention of doctors around the country and eventually patients who asked for it by name.
There's no question that our best, strongest pain medicines are the opioids.
North Carolina doctor Alan Spanos made a convincing statement back in 1998.
They don't wear out, they go on working. They do not have serious medical side effects.
It sold doctors, finally, an answer to help patients get rid of pain.
And so these drugs, which I repeat are our best, strongest pain medications, should be used much more than they are for patients in pain.
Around the same time, pain was put on equal status with blood pressure, heart rate, and temperature when measuring a person's health.
The physicians were actually penalized for not making patients 100% pain-free.
At the time, Dr. Parveen Khanna was a medical student. She now owns Pain Medicine Physicians of Jacksonville, but remembers the pressure to prescribe.
Patient became the judge. If you don't prescribe them or treat their pain the way they want to, you get bad reviews.
Dr. Sunil Joshi, the president of the Duval County Medical Society Foundation, says it wasn't just the marketing, but major studies that refuted what doctors had always known about opioids. They are addictive.
So then you start looking at all that and you feel that the drug is not habit-forming or addictive, so you feel like it's okay to prescribe it.
Did that lead to these 90-day prescriptions and 30-day prescriptions for acute pain?
Oh, absolutely. And so, you know, again, you know, patients who had pain felt like they were doing better on these medications, and so suddenly this was the way to do it.
During this time, prescriptions exploded, going up 8 million in 1 year.
Patients were not thinking that it could be harmful to them. They were just trying to take care of the pain and make it zero.
At what point is it the doctor's responsibility to say, hey, there's a problem here. This is no longer being used for pain, but this person has an addiction?
Yeah, and I think that without question, you know, we have to take some responsibility here because these medicines are coming by prescription, and we have to realize at some point that we're only treating pain for these patients and that we should only be treating it for brief periods of time.
In 2014, the guidelines from the American College of Physicians changed. It's now recommended that patients should physically see the doctor to get a refill instead of just calling the office. Doctors are also encouraged to address acute pain with shorter prescriptions and no refills.
You really need to be a little bit of an investigator, but also you do need to take patients at their word.
Dr. Justin Spooner of Beaches Laser Spine and Pain is also a psychiatrist. He believes doctors have the responsibility to be a part of the solution, and that means being proactive.
And that's, again, where it comes down to physician training and education. Many physicians are well-meaning. We have a medication that makes you feel good. Why not give you more? And doctors are aware of the risks.
When prescribing opioids, Dr. Khanna uses a checklist to determine a person's risk for addiction. She also has them answer questions to rate their sleepiness and sign an agreement that they won't share or abuse these drugs. She says the responsibility falls on her to consider all of this when prescribing opioids.
How does that feel, you know, as the doctor who really wants to cause no harm, and now you're in a situation where unknowingly you may have contributed to a death or somebody who has overdosed?
It doesn't feel good. Sometimes you feel a little guilt at times that I should have recognized the problem.
Dr. Joshi says all doctors have to make the tough judgment calls. If not, the results can be deadly.
And the physician needs to go to bed at night feeling like they did what's right for the patient. And ultimately, when physicians are looking at it that way, being altruistic for the patient, they will always do the right thing.
News4Jax is committed to helping people and families struggling with opioid addiction.
There's someone that you can talk to right now to get help. And we've partnered with Recovery Keys, a local addiction treatment and rehabilitation center. If you're concerned a loved one is struggling with opioid addiction, or if you want to know when it's time to seek help, call the number on your screen right now to speak directly with a trained specialist. Recovery Keys has offices in Jacksonville and St. Augustine, and they're waiting on your call, and they want to help.
Colin was not his addiction. You see, he's a warrior, and he fought with so much strength and fight for so many years. My husband lost that fight here in Jacksonville, Florida on Monday, August 14th, 2017. Some may not be aware that the addict is not just a junkie off the street. They're often well-respected professionals that we live and work with every day. You see, I hid his secret for so many years. Most had no idea of the struggle that we were facing. Learning and educating about addiction and sharing Colin's story is one of the best things that I can do to help my family and countless other families. No, you're not alone.
Back to our special coverage of Opioid Nation, an American epidemic. With the cost of prescription painkillers anywhere from $60 to $100 per pill, many people turn to heroin to feed their addiction.
It's not cheap, but significantly less expensive than prescriptions. A single dose of heroin usually costs around $10, depending on the city where it's purchased. Now, here's where it gets extremely dangerous. Many drug dealers are cutting their heroin with fentanyl. Take a look at this. This is how much it takes to kill the average person, right there, next to a penny. Kevin Dietz with our sister station in Detroit sat down with a former dealer who has turned his life around after seeing kids die from taking drugs they bought on the street.
Robert Bogues is one of those guys who supplies the people you love with the pot, pills, and powder that destroys their lives. Tonight, this former drug dealer is sharing his story in hopes of helping families avoid addictive drugs.
And I've seen more kids die from this. They end up buying it on the street somewhere. Now they're paying $500 a week for their Vicodin supply or whatever, OxyContin, whatever it is, and somebody says, hey, you could save that money if you just do this amount of heroin. And then lo and behold, they get a hold of some carfentanil, dead.
Robert Bogues obliterated much of his life and the lives of so many others with drugs. First by using them and then by selling them. Lesson number one. Pay attention to the early signs and put a stop to it.
The kids are always going to start working with what's out of mom and dad's medicine chest or what they can get online.
Sober now 5 years, he's sharing his story in hopes of making up for his past mistakes by trying to help save lives. This former drug dealer who faced addiction, prison, homelessness, and almost daily danger on the streets selling addictive drugs, now reduced to tears when talking about his face-to-face meeting with parents of drug-addicted children.
Each parent introduced themselves and, you know, how they had lost their kids to drugs. And it's the first time I've ever sat in front of parents like that just didn't know what to do.
What he did was tell them the truth.
Do they want to hear that I'm sorry because I represent the drug dealer that sold them the drugs at that point? But more than anything, I wanted them to understand the reality and the truth about addiction, that their kids weren't themselves.
Robert says he was not that different from other kids growing up. He was looking to be popular in high school. Academics and athletics didn't deliver prestige. Selling pot did.
It was the power.
The popularity?
Yeah, it was the popularity. I was the guy. I had the joints out in the parking lot. And that was probably coincides with the actual paying for my own pot. I think it was more the power.
He was using drugs to pay for his own. It's how he and most dealers get started. Then you blink and suddenly you've progressed into a big-time dealer. Cocaine, heroin, crystal meth, he has seen and sold it all and has nothing to show for it.
I don't know anybody that came out of it with everything. I don't know anybody, either you're going to jails, institutions, and death is what we say, but I don't know any drug dealer that didn't end up doing time, that had his money packed away. Sooner or later, the law catches up with everybody.
Telling me he has never seen anything quite like the grip prescription pills has on our communities.
I don't know how many people I know that are hooked on Adderall, but they believe because it's prescribed that it's okay.
Insisting big-time dealers and drug gangs don't have to bother selling pills. The pharmaceutical companies have flooded America with enough pills to create an unlimited supply of addicts.
Those pharmaceutical companies can buy out our own government and allow them to knowingly produce narcotics that they know are going to get the people hooked.
Once hooked on painkillers, Robert says it's easy to convince someone heroin is cheaper and stronger. Today, heroin is where the serious drug dealers make their millions.
They're creating customers, and what does that show?
His message to you and your family: if you or someone you love is addicted, get into recovery today.
It's progressive. If I was hooked on drugs and knowing where I was going to lead, if I can get that concept to them, then they might change their mind and do something about it, because it's going to happen.
Saying parents need to pay attention, primarily to your kids' smartphones. Kids can and do buy drugs right from the cell phone.
You're the kid, I'm the parent, you're not going to have a phone, you're not going to be on the internet, you're not going to access to all this.
Robert says he didn't grow up wanting to be an addict. He didn't grow up wanting to be a drug dealer, but it is the road he took. And now he's traveling the road of recovery, hoping to reach thousands of others who will follow the path. Robert says we're failing when it comes to prevention, education, and treatment. And that needs to change if America is going to overcome its addiction to opiates.
The DEA is also actively working to stop drugs at the border. An agent tells News4Jax that much of the heroin is coming from Colombia. And in China, that's where the fentanyl is coming from. And they're both being shipped to Mexico. And then in Mexico, it's smuggled into the U.S. and mixed into a deadly concoction. A lot of the drugs coming through hubs in America, hubs like Houston and Atlanta, and then into Florida. And we know in Port Canaveral, opioids and other illegal drugs are being found tucked away in cruise ship passenger baggage and hidden in belt buckles. In January, the Brevard County Sheriff's Office brought in trained canine dogs to help sniff out these drugs. In addition to stopping drugs from coming in, DEA agents are also working with local police trying to catch the dealers, and then they charge them with overdoses linked to their supply.
The other problem with fentanyl, it's a synthetic opioid, and there are several different types. Carfentanil is just one example. It's an elephant tranquilizer that's 100 times more potent than fentanyl, and it's out there on the street right now.
And this year, the Clay County Sheriff's Office announced its first murder arrest connected to the sale of fentanyl in Clay, Duval, and Nassau counties.
An accused drug dealer is charged in the overdose death of an 18-year-old woman. 32-year-old Trumaine Muller was indicted in May. He's accused of selling a lethal dose of fentanyl-laced heroin that killed Ariel Brundage, an FSCJ student, in November of last year. Her parents have asked us not to show her photo. Two other men, 26-year-old Tyler Hamilton and 32-year-old Christopher Williams, are facing manslaughter charges. They pleaded not guilty in June. Deputies said they bought the drugs that killed Brundage. And Hamilton, who was Brundage's boyfriend, was with her when she died. When Sheriff Darrell Daniels announced the arrests, he also sent a strong message to anyone who deals drugs or commits crimes in Clay County.
We talked about dragging people from the gates of hell in the past, and so we don't have to do that, get the hell out of Clay County, or we'll come get you.
According to the Sheriff's Office, this is one of 49 drug overdose deaths in Clay County last year.
Those cases are now being reviewed for possible murder charges for drug dealers.
Just south of Tampa in Bradenton, a dealer was just sentenced to 12.5 years in prison. 29-year-old Jarvis McCants. He's charged with intent to distribute fentanyl, and he pleaded guilty in May. During a search of his home, agents recovered narcotics, including 22 grams of a brown powdery substance that tested positive for fentanyl. Also found a loaded firearm and about $8,600 in cash.
Now, this comes just months after Governor Scott signed a bill that hands down stiffer penalties to drug dealers distributing illegal doses of fentanyl. Starting this fall, judges will be forced to sentence people possessing 4 grams of fentanyl to 3 years in prison. If a person has 14 grams, they face 15 years in prison. Anyone with 28 grams gets a minimum of 25 years in prison. The law will also allow the state to charge drug dealers with murder if someone overdoses on an opioid that they gave them. However, opponents of the bill wanted to give judges more discretion. As we first showed you back in May, the opioid overdose problem is so bad in Duval County, bodies are being turned away from the morgue.
Janice Harris has an update on the body count, as well as an inside look at how local hospitals are handling this growing epidemic.
There are one of 2 places where you will go during a drug overdose: hospital or the morgue.
Dr. Leos, 2759.
And Dr. Stephen Goodfriend is fighting against the epidemic, hoping he can save your life before you die.
Can you see if they unwrap 38s?
Goodfriend directs the emergency department at Orange Park Medical's main site. He's watched the rate of opioid overdose patients rise dramatically.
Probably about 2 years ago is when we started seeing a little bit of it, and then it really kind of ramped up over the past year and a half. And it's just been a steady influx of patients ever since then.
Some patients are brought by ambulance, but others are left outside.
It happens a fair amount, a lot more the past couple of years than it has in the past. It seems like it's definitely a weekly occurrence.
Why do you think someone would drop someone off as opposed to calling 911?
I think there's a fear. I think if you're engaged in activities that are, against the law, you're not going to want the police or EMS to come to your house.
Some friends stay behind and tell the emergency department their friend stopped breathing, but they don't know why. New laws are cracking down on drug dealers who sell deadly combinations of opioids. For the first time in history, for the 4th District State Attorney's Office, a drug dealer, Trumaine Muller, is facing murder for selling drugs that killed someone. The victim, 19-year-old Ariel Brundage. We followed Goodfriend for the day. We wanted to see just how often overdose patients come in. It's one of the most unpredictable occurrences I've ever seen.
Yesterday, talking to Jacksonville Fire and Rescue paramedics, they said it was a very busy day. They had one station had at least 7 overdoses in the area, which is a fair amount. Also today, we've already seen 1 overdose.
7 overdoses in one day, considered normal. And the next day, you could have none.
It comes in spurts. It comes in spurts, and that's in relation to when people start using the drugs, when the drugs become available, when they get sold on the streets. And if it's a higher concentration, especially of fentanyl, that's when we'll see a rush of patients.
Like any addiction, opioids have a ripple effect far from the emergency room. According to Fair Health Insurance claims in the United States, they have skyrocketed. In 2015, all patients were a cost of about $10,000. But for opioid abuse or dependence patients, it was $50.5 thousand, 500% higher. Many overdose patients survive. They are revived with Narcan, an opioid reversal drug. But according to many doctors, because the patient is addicted to opioids, they will return with another overdose. If they don't survive, they end up here, the morgue. We took you behind the scenes last May, where I found overdose deaths doubled in Duval from 201 in 2015 to 464 in 2016. It's expected to double again. In Clay County, it was 43 in 2015 and 70 in 2016. Dozens of autopsy records from drug overdoses show a culprit. We were warned about fentanyl. The District 4 Medical Examiner's Office covers Clay, Duval, and Nassau. This is the same medical examiner's office where their morgue is overwhelmed with dead bodies because the overdoses are coming in so fast. For months, Dr. Rao has been asking for more money.
And it is really burdening our office.
Each autopsy costs about $3,000 with about 30 overdoses a month. That's about $90,000 a month just for overdose death autopsies. We followed her to the budget meetings. She has been asking for more money and a new building. Now there is hope. She could get a new building, but it will take 5 years, and it would cost about $15 million. A positive moment and a tragic dilemma.
One of the reasons opioid addiction is so powerful is that users feel like they must keep taking the drug in order to stave off withdrawal, not necessarily to get a euphoric high. This is what many users call getting straight. Early symptoms of withdrawal usually start within 6 to 12 hours for short-acting opioids, and they start within 30 hours for longer-acting ones. Now, these can include muscle aches, agitation, sweating, a runny nose, and anxiety. Now, late withdrawal symptoms, they peak at around 48 to 72 hours, and they include nausea and vomiting, diarrhea, and stomach cramps. Doctors may administer Suboxone to ease discomfort. That's a combination of a mild opiate and naloxone. Now, after 7 to 10 days, physical signs of withdrawal have typically resolved, and this may seem like a painful process, but it's nothing like what some babies experience.
These newborns aren't crying because they're hungry. They are in excruciating pain. Every 25 minutes, a baby is born with an addiction to an opiate, an addiction they inherited from their drug-addicted mother. This is a growing problem in Jacksonville. In fact, our area leads the state with the most babies born suffering with drugs in their system. This evening, Tarek is taking us inside the neonatal intensive care unit at UF Health to get a closer look at the heart-wrenching withdrawal process.
Only a few weeks old. And already, pain and suffering is the only thing these babies know in their short lives. The cry from a baby addicted to opiates is higher pitched than that of a healthy baby. It's all because the moment their umbilical cord is cut, so is their drug supply.
I tried to quit at least 3 or 4 times during my pregnancy, and I just couldn't. I couldn't get that sick. I couldn't. Anytime I had enough money to try to make a bag, my brain was already there before my body.
This mother, who we'll call Sarah, says she was a fully functioning heroin addict who every morning, afternoon, and evening snorted the opiate throughout her pregnancy. She spent $80 a day to get high, fully aware that she was sacrificing her unborn son's health. Sarah says her heroin addiction was stronger than the bond with her unborn baby, and at the same time, her firstborn was put at risk.
When I'd go away from my child and use, I would come back in, cook, clean, do laundry, do bedtime stories. That was just my normal way of living. Nobody knew I was using. I went to all my doctor's appointments.
Sarah's deep, dark secret was exposed the moment her son was born. He was full term, but underweight and inconsolable. Doctors ran tests, knowing something wasn't right. After receiving the results, Sarah learned about the heart-wrenching process of weaning her second son off of heroin.
I cried all the time, just staring at him, knowing there was nothing I could do to fix it. It's painful to know that I did that to my child. That I had, because I couldn't quit, he had to hurt for me.
A newborn physically withdraws from heroin just like an adult, which often results in trembling, crying, vomiting, increased muscle tone, and even seizures. Typically, no amount of swaddling, holding, or rocking can soothe an addicted baby. Instead, they're given morphine in small dosages that slowly taper off. Dr. Samarth Shukla works in the NICU at UF Health and says addicted mothers don't fully understand the effects of their own selfishness.
It's painful for them, and hence you see them with excessive irritability, continuous crying. We are not able to console them. They cannot feed well. They have problems with weight gain, sweating. So it's definitely pretty stressful for babies.
The rate at which babies have been born with neonatal abstinence syndrome has quadrupled over the past 15 years, according to the Centers for Disease Control. The highest numbers of affected babies in Maine, Vermont, West Virginia, Tennessee, and right here in Florida. And the problem is worse right here in Duval County, according to UF Health records. In 2014, 121 babies were treated for neonatal abstinence syndrome. In 2015, that number jumped to 165 babies treated. And in 2016, 158 babies were born suffering through withdrawals. That's just UF Health. As for all of Duval County, sadly, state statistics show a bigger problem. Out of 10,000 live births in 2013, Duval County had 450 heroin-addicted babies, followed by Hillsborough County with 324, Pasco County 256, Brevard County with 231, and then Volusia County had 201 heroin-addicted babies.
We have been spending more than $1 billion every year behind treatment of this condition, which is in major part a completely preventable condition. Even in our unit, the numbers have been significantly going up.
Far too often, newborns aren't only exposed to heroin. The pregnant addicts are often alcoholics, taking prescription painkillers, or experimenting with other drugs. The number of heroin-addicted babies has been increasing since 2011, following a pill mill crackdown ordered by the Attorney General of Florida. Following the raids, opiates like heroin quickly became the drug of choice. Heroin, for instance, is cheaper on the streets, about $10 a hit, and easy to get locally. Doctors say the babies will likely suffer long-term neurological problems and have a greater chance of becoming a drug addict later in life.
Babies who have been exposed to drugs in their early neonatal fetal life eventually are at high risk for being drug dependent. So they definitely can go to drug usage or being drug dependent in future.
This mother says she wishes she would have sought professional help.
Anyone that is using or addicted to using knows that pain of constantly having to chase the high. You don't have to deal with that pain anymore.
There's someone you can talk to right now to get help if you or someone you know is battling with addiction.
We have partnered with Recovery Keys, a local addiction treatment and a rehabilitation center. So call the number on your screen right now to speak directly with a trained specialist.
Colin was not his addiction. You see, he's a warrior, and he fought with so much strength and fight for so many years. My husband lost that fight here in Jacksonville, Florida on Monday, August 14th, 2017. Some may not be aware that the addict is not just a junkie off the street. They're often well-respected professionals that we live and work with every day. You see, I hid his secret for so many years. Most had no idea of the struggle that we were facing. Learning and educating about addiction and sharing Colin's story is one of the best things that I can do to help my family and countless other families. No, you're not alone.
Back to our special coverage of Opioid Nation, an American epidemic. Many young people get hooked on opioids after suffering a sports injury. By the time high school athletes become seniors, about 11% will have used a narcotic pain reliever for non-medical purposes. Pro Football Hall of Famer Jerome Bettis says he's never dealt with opioid addiction personally, but he has seen other players struggle.
There were some horror stories about guys that abused the pain medication, and it didn't start big, it started small, and it started because of an injury, but then after that injury was healed, you still saw that those issues linger.
Bettis says he's made it his mission to educate young athletes about addiction.
The fight against opioid addiction will be stronger in Jacksonville with new funding.
In June, the City Council approved a bill for a $1.4 million pilot program titled Project Save Lives. Janice Harris explains how that program will hopefully make a difference.
We will attempt to accomplish three things today.
It's March 9th, 2016. Councilman Bill Gulliford is hosting more than a town hall meeting tonight. This is a room full of fighters. Some are fighting for their loved ones to become free from opioids.
I really didn't understand addiction. And I thought that he was running from something.
Others are fighting against their addiction to opioids.
I was eventually fired in shame for stealing change out of desks and coming into the building on the weekends to steal food from the refrigerators of different departments.
And some are fighting against the opioid epidemic as first responders.
If we continue at this trend, if we do nothing, I promise you the cost will be $4.5 million in 2017.
People may say it's a disease, but they rarely treat it like one.
Together, they want to see an end to the epidemic. This man might have an idea that could help.
So we know the data, we know the death.
Every day we know the death rates, and it's growing and growing and growing.
Dr. Palm is the brainchild behind the pilot program called Project Save Lives. For months, we have watched him, Councilman Bill Gulliford, and several community leaders beg the public to take the opioid epidemic seriously.
As far as I'm concerned, if those who don't take action are complicit in any future deaths.
People are listening. The pilot program would cost approximately $1.4 million and would run for 6 months. The pilot would be launched at St. Vincent's Hospital. Any person that comes in for a drug overdose would be stabilized and offered immediate treatment. If it works, the program could go to other hospitals in Jacksonville. The pilot program was proposed in the spring and approved in the summer. But as we approach fall, it may not start until October. But it's clear that if the pilot program works, more lives will be saved.
If you or someone you know is suffering from addiction, there are ways to get help.
You can call Recovery Keys at 904-615-8602. You can also call Lutheran Services Florida at 877-229-9098. You can find these numbers on our website at news4jax.com/addiction. And coming up tonight on News 4 Jax at 11, I got a chance to peek inside one local family's foster home as they join the critical fight to rescue children from opioids.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you to Recovery Keys for sponsoring Opioid Nation and American Epidemic.
And remember, together we can win this fight and take back our...
Tracking dangerous storms minute by minute. The Weather Authority on News